I'm coming in hot with another late review. I'm sorry. I already covered this one on TikTok, but I just didn't get around to actually making a YouTube video about it. But hopefully this can be a better late than never situation. And I also do need to call out. Technically, I saw a preview of this show. I saw the opening preview of this show, and that was the opening debut of the show. So take with a grain of salt everything that I'm saying in this review, but I'm going to sort of stick to things that I think are going to be consistent through future performances of it, etc. So we're talking about Diary of a Gay Disaster, which played at the King's Head Theatre in Angel in London. And the show is written by Rachel Mailer, who I know and saw recently actually in Legally Blonde, which was put on by the Festoon Theatre Company in the UK. And so she's clearly multi-talented. She can act and she can sing and she's very good at that stuff, but also has written this musical. And the overall premise is there is a girl who moves into a house with two other women and they bond over the challenges and the joys of queer relationships and the kind of comedy that can come from that, as well as the heartbreak and the difficulty. And I mean, overall, it's very much a celebration. Like, I don't want to make out that this is a show where you go in and you're like, oh man, yeah, this is really hard when you come out. Like, instead, it's very much an uplifting show, I think, in many ways. And it is very funny too, which is really nice, because you never know with this sort of thing if you're going to get a musical about these sorts of themes and it's going to be very laden with or sort of dragged down by like the millennial view of Gen Z. Like, you know, when you see a show, like, for example, I had this issue with 101 Dalmatians at the Regent's Park Open Air Theatre last year, where they were trying to portray this character that was meant to be an influencer, right? Like Cruella de Vil, right? She was meant to be an influencer in that show. That was the way that they did it. But they kept making these jokes about like, oh yeah, so like hashtags, yeah. And I mean, I'm literally a YouTuber. It's what I've done for the last 14 years. All of my friends are content creators. And I was sort of sitting there going like, this just isn't landing. Like, hashtag, no. And I get it, right? Like, it's a caricature and blah, blah, blah. But in this case, it didn't have that, I want to use this word very delicately, but almost the cringe to it, or the mismatch with my lived experience, let's say, and my lived perception of reality with the characters that were being portrayed. There was no mismatch there to be maybe a little nicer to 101 Dalmatians. In the case of this show, it just felt like it got it, and it got it really well. And the audience were in hysterics for the entire thing, but the entire thing was only an hour. And so this is one of the interesting things about this show. Like I said, it was a preview, and I got a little slip when I went that said it's still in development, and so there are aspects of the script, songs, and staging that they're experimenting with. And you would expect that, right, for a preview, but the show itself, from my perspective, isn't necessarily finished. And I want to be clear here. It's finished when Rachel decides that it's finished. And I spoke to her after the show and said, like, are you going to add to this? Or like, what's the plan next? And she was like, honestly, right now, not 100% sure. But I think there is huge amounts of room for this to turn into something slightly longer, and for there to be slightly more padding with more scenes in between the songs. Because as it stands right now, Diary of a Gay Disaster is full of a bunch of bops that are very relatable for people, or at least just real kind of earwormy songs. Like one of them, for instance, is called Is She Queer or Just a Hipster? And it gets in your head in exactly the sort of way that you could probably imagine. But the actual scenes in between are pretty short and sweet. There isn't a huge amount of exposition that happens, and it's a very contained show. It takes place in a room, in a flat, and it never goes anywhere else. It's just three girls, more or less, sort of, for lack of better description, having like a sleepover and going through this diary and singing songs about that. But it's like a series of songs. It's not a huge amount of conversation. It's not a huge amount of other bits and pieces. It's not a huge amount or any of going to any other areas, locations, or whatever. And that's fine, right? Like, that's not a problem. And you can have a show that takes place in a room, and that's all good. There's nothing wrong with that. But it wouldn't surprise me if the show in the future ended up being something that Rachel added to give it a little bit more sort of meat between the ribs. Jesus, what sort of an analogy am I spinning up here? Just for lack of better word, like padding it out. I could just imagine it really working being an hour and a half, not an hour. And I don't know if that will happen, but if it does in the future, and if Rachel experiments with that, I will be cheering it on as a choice that I'm really enthusiastically gonna be paying attention to and looking forward to. So like I said, it was a preview, so I'm not gonna rate it, but the Diary of a Gay Disaster is something that I think should be on your radar as a new, up-and-coming, completely organic, like from the grassroots show. This is not something that has been spat out by some corporate machine in any way. And you can tell, you watch it, the way the jokes land, the way that the audience connects with the characters on stage, you can really tell that it's got some lovely energy to it. And it's something that I hope to see blossom over the next few years. So it's a double thumbs up from me. If you get a chance to see it at some time in the future, or like I know that they're doing a performance, I think at Heaven, maybe in like a day or two or something, and singing a couple songs from it there, then I'd say that it's gonna be fun, and you should give it a shot. But in the meantime, while you're waiting, if you want to see some more theater reviews from me, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you soon.